thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today to talk about an issue that doesn't get talked enough about, and that is what is happening with food supplies, especially as it relates, and hunger, especially as it relates to rural America. I think there's frequently this idea that food deserts only occur in urban areas, that hunger is an urban problem. But we know from the work that we've done at One Country and the work that we will continue to do, that there are pockets of poverty and pockets of hunger in rural America that go unaddressed and maybe become invisible, especially as it relates to minority populations. And so today, One Country, which is an organization that I founded along with my friend Joe Donnelly, Senator Donnelly from Indiana, is going to explore those issues and also explore the opportunities that we have as we look at political changes, whether people win or lose, but the opportunity that we have to raise this issue and to challenge other people to think differently, especially politicians to think differently about hunger. But just a little background on One Country. Most of you know that I grew up in a town of 90 people. My family was 1/10 the population of Mantador, North Dakota, but both of my grandparents on my mom's side, my dad's side, were family farmers. And the one thing that family farmers would always tell you, we didn't have a lot of cash, we didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't go hungry. Because they grew their own food and they milked their own cows, and they took, raised chickens and did whatever it took. That's not the situation that we have today in rural America. And so we want to explore that. We want to talk about how the issues of rural America and getting food to people in rural America are unique and challenged. And so if
30 seconds worth.
if we're going to have a chance to actually have a conversation, it's important that you not listen to former politicians, but you listen to people who are on the ground doing this important work. And so we've arranged a great group of panelists for all of you. They've asked that they be allowed to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to start out with one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, Sister Simone, who has taken it on herself to become educated about what's going on in rural America. We'll then go to, let me see if I can get to Christopher Spencer, and then Doug Shepperd, and we'll then, well, if we can get Doug back, he's having some connectivity problems. And then John Tyson from Tyson Foods, who will talk about the challenges that they've had as a major food supplier in our country, delivering food and getting food where it belongs. So Sister, take it away. Explain to folks what you've been doing and why hunger has become such a priority for your organization.
Oh, how great to be with you. Thank you for this opportunity. Our organization is networked, Lobby for Catholic Social Justice, and we've existed for 48 years, almost 50 years. And in our time, we've worked for economic justice, for access to basic needs for low-income families in our nation. And quite frankly, we were all city folk. And back in 2018, when we realized we were all city folk and we did not know the rural reality, we needed to educate ourselves. So we went around the country. We did 17 roundtables in 16 states. Texas, because it's so big, got two roundtables, lifting up the issues of rural communities, learning. We were learners to learn about the reality of rural communities. The first thing I could say we learned is we were down in New Mexico at our second rural roundtable, and Pueblo chief said to me, "Why are you calling these food deserts? Quit giving deserts a bad name. Deserts are beautiful." And he proceeded to indicate the beautiful Sonoran Desert, and we said, "Oh, yeah, they are." So he said, "We just have an economic issue and we have a lack of food issue. It's not a desert." And as we studied, what we learned, this lack of food is many-leveled. The fact that there are not the way you were talking about growing up on the farm is most, quote, farm families now live in town and don't have the same experience. So they don't grow small little plots, they told us. So they don't have their vegetable gardens. Then we were told not only that, but being able to commute to get food is really a big issue. So they depend on Dollar General or the other dollar stores who don't have, for the most part, fresh fruits and vegetables, don't have healthy choices. That's a huge problem. And then in the pandemic, and I'm sure John is going to talk about this, we heard about farmers who were suffering greatly in the pandemic because the supply chain was broken. We had one woman we met in Indiana at our roundtable, and she's a dairy farmer. She called us in tears, because she could not get her milk to market because her milk had been going to schools. Well, with all the schools closed and nobody needing those small little containers that kids drink from, oh my glory, she was having to dump her milk as opposed to get it to people who were thirsty for milk. And we've heard about folks with beef cattle. They've had to sell it off because the supply chain is not flexible enough to really, or nimble enough to respond to these changing needs. So it's an issue of supply chain, it's an issue of distance, it's an issue of access. And mostly, I think it's a sense that the business model of big chain grocery stores doesn't get money into what they call small margin markets. We were, just one more story, we were in Poetry, Texas. Who knew there was a Poetry, Texas? And the people at the Rural Roundtable said to me that they were pretty happy that their hospital closed because it was so terrible, but they were really upset and furious that their grocery store closed, because their grocery store closed because there was not a big enough margin of profit for the national chain they were a part of. That's not right. We've got to find another way forward. Our people need quality food, and we undermine whole communities if we don't figure this one out. So thank you for this opportunity to lift up what we learned. I've become a fanatic on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sister. And now we're going to turn to Christopher Spencer, who's going to talk about maybe a rural America that we don't think about when we think about rural America. I always say we have this image of, America Gothic, with grandpa and grandma on a farm, and that's not always who lives in rural America. So, Chris, if you could just give us some insights on your experience with rural America and food insecurity.
Well, thank One Country for having us on and to be a part of this. I'm Chris Spencer, the Community Engagement Officer for the Black Belt Community Foundation, which is based out of historic Selma, Alabama. And we service 12 of the poorest counties in our state, and many of them rank among the poorest in our nation. When the pandemic hit, our foundation started a food collective. We work with nonprofits across 12 counties. Before this Farmer to Families program, we actually added 4 additional counties. And we experienced some extreme problems with the supply chain to food actually getting to various counties and places. And a lot of the stipulations in order for trucks to come, being in rural America, we're just very poor. We are without all the things that Sister Simone talked about. We're without health care, we're without transportation systems, and we have great needs in the Alabama Black Belt region. And so we have experienced extreme difficulty. It seemed like every time there is a delivery, well, if a community don't have a dock, or if a community doesn't have a forklifts, then we get left behind. Or if it's easier to drop 10,000 boxes of food off in an urban area like Birmingham versus traveling to rural Sumter or rural Greene County, then oftentimes we get left out. And so we're just so glad to be a part of this panel and to share with you some of the things that are going on in the Alabama Black Belt region.
Well, I thank you so much. And I would like to just take an opportunity to talk about Native Americans, because I recently had an experience at the beginning of COVID when I thought about where the food insecurity would be the most acute. And I called my friend, a woman by the name of Mary Trottier, who has been working to try and do food distribution on Spirit Lake and also on Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa reservations. And fortunately, because of the investment that Spirit Lake Tribe has made and the work of Mary and her staff, who are fabulous, they had forklifts. They had the ability to get large quantities, commodity style quantities delivered. And so we were able to convince the guys at Buxton Bean to provide some pinto beans. And we had Cargill was gracious enough to provide cooking oils, various levels of cooking oil. We got some great support from the North Dakota State Mill that provided flour. And we also got some great support from the pasta factory that we have here in North Dakota, which is actually owned by a venture capital firm. But everybody stepped up. But the only reason we were able to do that is because we had already made those investments, and Mary was good enough to receive those goods and then figure out a way to get them over to Turtle Mountain, which is another 100 miles from her distribution center. But these are real challenges and real, especially when we're dealing with gifts of large commodities. And I don't know if Doug's on yet. Doug, are you with us? Our producer? I think, John, we're going to turn to you because I think that's a good segue into your challenges and into the work that Tyson Food is doing as it relates to food security and insecurity, especially in rural areas. And so if you can share some insights, and then we'll turn it over to some Q&A to the panel, that'd be great.
Sure thing. Well, first off, Senator Heitkamp, thank you for convening this group, and thanks to the team that's kind of working behind the scenes. We were on a call last week and getting ready for this. So there's some behind the scenes work that goes on to making an event like this happen. You know, I'll talk a little bit about the challenges we face, but just for those that don't know a little bit about Tyson Foods, Tyson is a protein company, and we're based in Springdale, Arkansas, right in the northwest corner of the state, kind of close to Oklahoma and Missouri. And we process and sell chicken, beef, pork, and some consumer packaged good items all over the world, but predominantly in North America. And we sell to both retailers and restaurants. So there's a great chance that you're eating Tyson products even when you don't know it. And we estimate about 1/5 of the protein served in the United States comes from a Tyson facility. And the theme or the title of today's event is Feeding Families. And that's just what we do at Tyson. In fact, I actually can think, you know, some of my earliest memories of Tyson are kind of driving in the back of my parents' car. And I think we used to have emblazoned on the side of every single Tyson tractor trailer, feeding you like family. That was really our company purpose statement for many, many years, and something that we still talk about regularly. As far as food security and the work that we're doing and the role that a company like ours can play, you're going to hear me today talk consistently about access. How do we ensure access to healthy and affordable food? And I think there's really about 3 buckets that I put that into. First is ensuring that there's affordability, so that the most vulnerable Americans are able to afford food, and the investments in the supply chain that we make don't actually create unintended consequences. The second thing is we're an advocate for increasing and retaining the SNAP program in the U.S., and we can talk a little bit about that. But I think what's most interesting and relevant to this group is how we think and talk about our supply chain. And we need a resilient supply chain. I think COVID has taught us that there are vulnerabilities we didn't necessarily anticipate, not just us as a company, but us as a country. And we've certainly made some investments so that there is some optimization and transferability through the supply chain. So stories like what Sister Simone told us don't happen again in the future. And the other piece of access is just what Chris was describing and what Senator Heitkamp was describing, where when you get to the end of the supply chain, it's not quite last mile, but call it last 10 miles, where some of these communities and the food banks don't actually have the infrastructure to take on commercial scale, commodity scale, like our company would provide, the food donations that otherwise would go into these urban or more suburban areas. And so more than anything, thanks for having me, and I'm excited to be a part of the conversation here.
You're muted, Heidi.
Senator, I think you might be muted.
sorry about that. I thought I pressed the button. I was just saying, I don't think that we can find solutions to the problems that we're discussing here without involving people who are involved in that food chain and in that supply chain. I think Doug's with us. Doug, are you with us? Doug Shepperd, he might be on the phone because guess what? He lives in rural America and we're having connectivity problems. So Doug, if you want to offer some insights from a producer standpoint, what COVID has meant and what you hope will happen kind of moving into the future. Did we lose Doug again? Okay, well, then I'm going to take the role as producer because I've spent a lot of time talking to American producers. And you already heard from Sister Simone as a farmer crying because she had to dump milk because she had no place for market. There's nothing that disheartens somebody who's provided food for the world and food for our country than not seeing that food get to where it needs to go and not seeing that food being consumed, especially when there's so much need out there. I want to raise one issue before we go to the panelist questions, and maybe Doug can sign on or get on eventually. But I want to mention that we had a little victory today, and that is the courts have rolled back, or at least prevented, the changes to the SNAP program that the administration had proposed. And I know that Sister Simone has been very involved in the SNAP program. I've fought very hard to make sure that we are in cooperation with all of the other food distribution systems within the federal government and USDA so that we're providing nutritious, good food and make that sure that food is affordable. I want to give you a story. It's a story about when I was in Rugby, North Dakota, and I was doing a town hall, and I had a number of community members there. And a lot of the community members, I think sometimes there's this sense that somebody's getting something they don't deserve, or that this food security program is being cheated somehow, or that it's not being used appropriately. And so I was talking to the audience, and when I got all done, explaining the challenges that we had, and so many people on SNAP, they don't stay on SNAP. It's a one-time thing for them, or it helps them get over the hump, or it's not a program that has a high rate of fraud, waste, or abuse. And after I got all done, a gentleman came up to me with his wife, and he was a local minister. And he told this story. He said that he and his family can't afford milk because he doesn't make a lot of money as a minister in a small town. They buy powdered milk. But he said, we consider this ministry critically important to who we are. And this is what we want to do with our lives, but we can't afford to feed our children. And so we're on SNAP. We're on food assistance, and we work more than full time. And so I think we need to tell those stories rather than the, as I call him, the lobster man, surfer boy that got to be the poster boy for waste, fraud, and abuse in the SNAP program. For every one of those, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of needy families who are working families. And that's the beauty of the SNAP program. And I really have to applaud the faith community, including the work that Sister Simone was doing. But we had great cooperation in North Dakota with the Catholic bishop and with the Lutheran bishop in promoting the SNAP program. And now we have the courts basically protecting those people who are on food assistance, and they're the vast majority of whom are working Americans. And so I just want to say that and kind of give a little shout out to the courts who are preventing this problem from getting any worse. And so I think we're gonna maybe start out with all the panelists, and you guys feel free to jump in. Feeding America projects, and that's such an important point. And the World Food Program, let's give a shout out to them. It's an organization that has one of the best reputations of any organization in the world in terms of fulfilling their mission. And a lot of it is infrastructure, which we're going to talk about today. The fact that they can get food to needy people in any corner of the world, just won the Nobel Peace Prize. So it tells you that this work is being recognized and rewarded. But Feed America Feeding America is also one of those sister programs that is so critical. It projects that 54 million, think about that, 54 million. We have a little bit over 300 million people in this country, and so 54 is about a sixth of them would face hunger during 2020, including 18 million children. Many of those children, as we know, live in rural areas. So how do we begin to address this problem and provide the much needed relief? And Chris, we'll let you kick it off because I'm sure you've seen it personally in the great nonprofit work that you're doing, and you can give us some insight on what you think would be helpful and would make a difference.
As John alluded to earlier, the infrastructure is a major problem. Even though there might be groups that in the supply chain have lots of food and vegetables that they're getting out across our nation, but does the food actually get to the most needed communities? And what we have seen in the rural Black Belt areas is that oftentimes we get left behind because of the lack of transportation assets, because there are no warehouses that's capable, that's refrigerated. There are no refrigerated trucks. I would say my home county of rural Sumter County is 75 miles away from the nearest food bank in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. There is a food bank in Montgomery that several of our counties receive food from. There's also a food bank in the Selma area, but we need a strong commitment from the federal government, as well as our state leadership need to buy into that these communities have great needs, and they need to make the infrastructure available, whether there be warehouses, whether there be forklifts, docks. And I want to say this, our schools play a major role. And in most cases, the only time our children are able to get, the majority of the children in the Black Belt region get a well-balanced meal is when they're at school. And well, COVID-19 hit, the pandemic hit, and then the schools closed. And so you have school officials that don't know a lot about epidemiologists and all of this, the disease, the virus and all these kinds of things. And they are scrambling, trying to find safe ways to get food to families and to our children. And the faith component has stepped up in our region as well. There are sites where the schools have partnered with faith leaders and organizations to actually purchase food from some of the food banks, or the schools use their system for transportation, their vans and other assets that they have. But there's a great need in rural Alabama and Mississippi when it comes to getting the food actually to the most needed consumers.
Thanks so much, Chris. Sister Simone, how do you think we should tackle this problem? You've been all over the country talking to rural communities. What do you think would work to basically reduce this rate of hunger, especially in rural communities?
Well, I want to second everything that Christopher was saying. I mean, right on. We need to get more infrastructure down lower. But I would also suggest some creativity, because when we were in Mississippi, we were in Tutwiler, Mississippi, and the only place where they could get any sort of food, prepared food or fresh food, was what they called at the gas station. They had gas station chicken. And gas station chicken was the only thing that was available, or they had to travel the 7 miles down into the neighboring town where there was a Dollar General. And what I came to realize is that local communities have distribution models, but they don't fit the big supply chain. Because John, as you were talking, I had visions of one of those chains on the, on a cruise ship, one of those really big, huge chains. And what we need are more chains like the size of the ones that are on swings in the play yard, that get down to the small distribution local methods that people have. And that's one thing. So we need to be more creative. The other piece that we need to include is, Heidi, I celebrate that court decision, and I was talking about the importance of SNAP in these rural communities and what a multiplier effect getting new money into the community has. And I was so excited. And then at one roundtable I had, the table blew up. People were just furious. Those people, what? To their community, and they felt that it was like a judgment that a federal program needed to come in to help their people because they were unable to meet the magnitude of the need. And so that has taught me that we need to make better communal engagement for this distribution because it's a systemic problem. It's not like they're failing their people. The need is just so big, as you said at the beginning of the conference. So we need to bring creativity to make small change as well as the big change. And we also need creativity. How do we use local communities to ensure that distribution actually happens and everyone feels a part of a process? We feel like we contributed, because that's the beauty of rural America, is to think that we have a communal duty to each other. Let's find ways to meet that duty.
You know, and it's interesting, sister, one of my great allies in fighting for the SNAP program, guess who it was? It was the rural grocers, because they knew how much they relied on this program to provide food to people who couldn't otherwise afford it. And so, you know, we were always working with the rural grocery stores. And I think you're right. I think, how do we do a better job educating about the importance of the SNAP program to kind of a community opportunity for distribution. So Doug, I think you're on with us. Hi, Doug. Thanks so much for joining us. If you want to go ahead and make your introductory remarks from a producer standpoint and then talk about some ideas you have to help combat hunger in America, that'd be great.
Well, obviously sometimes internet access isn't the best out here in rural America. And that's kind of what you're seeing right now, but we are on now. So again, Doug Shepperd, a ranch, cattle feeding operation, farming operation in north central Nebraska. Been doing this my whole life, except for a few years of college. Have a lot of important, you know, a lot of questions that we see that's going on right now in this industry, and the problems that we're having with getting food to the people that really need it. Not that everybody doesn't need it, but we're finding out that we were not ready for this type of pandemic or tragedy to hit, because there is such a magnitude of food that is raised out here in America, and that all these farmers and ranchers, myself being one of them, take great pride in doing. And it's very disheartening to see that we have people that are going to bed hungry because we didn't get the food to them. So with that, I'll listen on some more. I've missed some of the first part, but go ahead and ask me if you need more questions, and thank you.
Thanks so much. And I said I kind of filled in a little bit for you because we didn't know if you'd be able to join, but I would tell you that all of the producers that I know take great pride in the fact that we should call them farmers and ranchers, because somehow when we call them producers, that puts them in a category that maybe is not the category they want to be in. But farmers and ranchers that are my friends take enormous pride in the fact that they provide that very essential, and we found out that during COVID, that essential service of providing food, which allows us to transition to John. Talk about how you see hunger from your business standpoint, and what we can do together that you think will help combat over 50 million people in this country who are food insecure.
Well, sure thing. And I think the points that have been made have already been good ones. And I might just build on something Sister Simone said. And I don't think it's one or the other, a big honkin' cruise ship supply chain, and then the smaller, more nimble kind of swing set. supply chain, but it needs to be a combination of these two things. You know, you can't have one without the other. And I emphasize that point here, that there's a benefit to kind of the system that has been optimized for efficiency, but we need to go for resilience. And that's something that is important to Tyson. The one example I'll share, and to illustrate this, is we have a really strong focus at Tyson at investing in and delivering services to our Tyson communities. And we operate in about 100 different towns in America. And we've actually invested in over 30 different locations, what we call our community pantry programs. These are places that Tyson does business. We have a processing facility or a feed mill, yet in that same community where so much food is produced for, you know, a whole state or a part of the country, they don't have the infrastructure to actually feed people that are in the community and need it. And so that's a little bit of a juxtaposition about how you can have this big chain, but where's the small chain that links to it? And we're focused on ensuring that those links come together.
You know, I think Sister Simone probably said it best, which is, you know, we always feel like it's the last mile in rural America that creates the bottleneck or the challenges. And so, Sister, when I'm going to come back to you, you talked a lot about your discussion in Paris, or in Poetry, Texas, I should say. Yeah, I think you picked that town for its name. Let's just be a little honest. In Poetry, Texas, where people kind of thought that if a community member had to be on some kind of government assistance program like SNAP, that was a community failure. There's good and bad in that. So how do we get communities to kind of look around and accept the fact that there is hunger in America, which some people who have never experienced it deny, and how do we get them to engage in a more robust way to augment and supplement any kind of government assistance program?
Well, you know, one of the things that we talked about, because that was my exact concern, because it was obvious in this region, 2 hours east of Dallas, that there was hunger right here in this community. But what we talked about was having to lessen the shame of not being able to adequately support your family, and to make the community stronger. So it was the sense of communal duty. Because one of the women came in carrying this casserole to put in the fridge because she was taking it to a neighbor who had recently gotten out of the hospital. That was acceptable. But the fact that further down the road were several families whose parent had lost the job, they were having really economic troubles. They only could get piecemeal work on the ranches, and that's not that regular. So they were depending on SNAP benefits, but they were hiding. And I think the thing is we've got to unhook the shame and to reinvest in all of us working to contribute to the community, so that people see they are putting in, even if they don't have the economic cash at the moment. And that communal sense, I think, is at the heart of this. How do we recover the idea that in our nation, it's we the people forming a more perfect union together? And it's regardless of whether or not I'm earning my own dime. And of course, then the other part of this that I'm just a nut on, yes, we care desperately about SNAP benefits, but I care equally desperately that wages reflect what it takes to raise a family, and wages stay pace with costs. That hasn't happened. And so most of the people on SNAP benefits are workers, just like the story you told about the pastor up in North Dakota. So the fact is, SNAP becomes a business subsidy, because instead of paying a living wage, folks are relying on a government benefit. So that funds the business. So we need to change our mindset. We need to create a greater sense of community, and let's end the shame about it, please. That's so needed.
You're so right. And when that shame goes both ways. Some people not wanting to even admit that they have a problem, and therefore their children go without, or their grandmother goes without. And so, Chris, are you seeing any of that there's a hesitancy because of kind of social norms or expectations that people are unwilling to ask for assistance? And how do we overcome that in the Black Belt?
Well, we do have some of that, and I can echo what my state senator Bobby Singleton in District 24. He always says that we are too poor, P-O-Po, we too poor to be quiet. So we must advocate for the citizens and residents of our region. And I want to piggyback off something Sister Simone said about shame. I think we need more common sense policy from Washington to the states and all the way down through the local levels. And I'm gonna give you a good example. The federal government sent $1.9 billion to the state of Alabama. And the title of the legislation is called the CARES Act, the CARES Act fund, where the state of Alabama set up a reimbursable type system. Instead of giving communities grants to be able to do the things that they need to do, unless they find ways to spend the monies, they won't even receive the monies. And to me, that's bad. I sent a request to the state the other day for a city, and they wanted to pay for transportation to get food to residents across the county. And that request was denied. So we send these requests up to legal at the state finance department to say, is it okay? Because if these cities and towns spend the money and if the state don't approve it, they're not going to get reimbursed for it. But to say in the middle of a pandemic that a city or a town won't be able to get reimbursed for transporting food is ridiculous. And I think we need more common sense policy from Washington all the way down through our states. Something else that kind of struck a nerve when Sister Simone was talking earlier is she indicated that when she was advocating for the SNAP program that those grocery store owners were there. Where we are, there aren't a lot of grocery stores. So there's no voice. In many of these little towns and cities, there's no voice. And we're depending on people like Dollar General or these type of groups that don't even have lots of them. I recently saw in Mississippi on a trip where Dollar General has started some neighborhood grocery stores like the Walmart chain has. So I'm not sure what's going to be the right mesh for little cities and towns across rural Alabama and Mississippi, but we don't even have a lot of grocery stores. We have people having to travel from West Alabama all the way to Meridian, Mississippi, just to go to a decent grocery store. And that's 45, 50 miles. And it's like that throughout our region. So we need more common sense policy in our region, and our people need to be involved from the lower level all the way up.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. And I will tell you that one of the great challenges, whether it's healthcare, whether it is delivery of food, transportation, if you talk to anyone who is involved in delivery of services and the challenges of rural America, the second, third thing on their list will be transportation. But yet, if you aren't listening to people out where we grew up and where we live, they don't know that. And so it's really tone deaf for people not to fund and help with that infrastructure, getting food where it belongs. Doug, I want to turn to you, and I think because part of this comes from our region, the Dole-McGovern compromise that was made between the Farm Bill, which helps secure a steady supply of commodities and important food for our country, also has the other end, which is the consuming end, and SNAP. And there's always this argument: should we keep SNAP in the Farm Bill? How do we convince farmers who would otherwise argue that we really need to have this coalition of farmers and ranchers working with these programs that are looking at, like Chris's and Sister Simone's programs that really think about delivery of food to people who are hungry? How do we connect those dots and build a better coalition for food security politically?
Well, obviously there is a a large need for the SNAP program. And I think the disconnect here is you have so many people are told, well, the farm bill just helps the farmer. So the farmer, rancher, the producer, he gets looked at that, well, it's just helping us, but really it's helping us so many people. And that's, and somehow get that disconnect back together. I think what Mr. Spencer just talked about, a common sense approach. We don't, we seem to have lost the common sense here approach to all these things. And these problems that have come up now big time because of the pandemic, we weren't ready for them. And nor I don't think America could have been ready for them. So having everyone understand that the USDA farm programs, you know, the people in rural know what that helps us as a safety net, but the people in the city don't necessarily need to say. I've heard comments say, well, you farmers out there get all these payments, you can't lose any money. And it's like, no, that's not exactly what this farm program does. There's a huge disconnect on what the program actually does for the people. Now, how we get them all together to agree on that, you know, we always hear bad word travels 100 times faster than good words. So everybody says, well, this program is just overladen with money and it goes to the people that don't need it. And there's probably some truth to that. But the common sense approach is we know we have a problem. We know that there is a problem with getting the food distribution and getting people to understand it. I think if you would ask any rancher, any farmer, that if they were in favor of the SNAP program, they would probably answer the same way I'm saying is, yes, if it's used properly and it gets into the right hands and there isn't such an enormous amount of waste. Because I really do think every true farmer and rancher would sit here and say, yeah, people need help, we'll help, because that's the way of the rancher. And Senator Heitkamp, you know that as well as anybody being in agriculture, that it's helping hands is what we try to do here. So I don't think anybody on our side of it wants to see the program go away by any means. We want to see used in a better, more common sense way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been some tension, and we've been able to politically fight it back and really think about the Farm Bill as a food program, because guaranteeing that we have farmers, especially small stakeholder farmers, be successful in this country, diversifies our food supply chain, but it also is about food. It's about feeding America. And we need to think about the Farm Bill not that way, and not just about whether that in fact provides financial support to farmers. John, you've heard now all these folks talk about the stigma, talk about kind of food insecurity and the challenges that they have in delivery. I mean, how do you see, just you and other major food suppliers, how do you see your role in all of this? And how, I mean, you told us the story about in places where you have processing facilities, you really have done that kind of philanthropic work. But what more do you think food suppliers could do to provide a more steady support for many of our food programs?
Well, I think that's that's an important question. And, you know, I think first off, one thing that we can recognize is the way that our system works in terms of who has influence and who does not. One thing that we feel really strongly about at Tyson is how do we use the voice that we have on behalf of our industry, but also on behalf of the over 120,000 people that work at Tyson to say, hey, this is what we're seeing in our communities. This is how we need to make changes that benefit people and not just companies like ours. I think the other thing too is we haven't touched on it much today, but there's a really big question of health in our country today. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, advocating such as programs like SNAP are prioritizing and favoring healthy food options for people is extremely important. And to tie it all back to the supply chain issue that we've talked about, you know, one challenge that we see is that, you know, at the food distribution networks, not food-focused nonprofits and food banks, there's not always that refrigerated and frozen fresh component for people. And that is where a lot of your fresh protein, as well as your fresh produce, how it gets delivered. And so just being a voice for that is just one of the many roles that a company like Tyson could play.
Well, and those are excellent suggestions. I want to make a couple points. One of the, as we looked at nutrition, not just calories, but actual nutrition, which John raised, high quality food that will combat the epidemic of obesity, which we know inflicts poor people more than rich people. Susan Collins and I were able to get a bill looking at grant programs so that we could add additional refrigeration and hot lunch programs, because what we heard from the school cooks were, look, you can give me all these vegetables, I have no place to put them. I need refrigeration. And, when you look at moving forward on nutrition, I think we have to be mindful that these programs have to work to improve the quality of food, not just the quantity of food or availability. And so, one of the things that we've learned from COVID, one of the high risk factors in terms of mortality is obesity. And so once again, we've come full circle on that public health crisis, which needs to still be addressed. And we need programs that impose nutrition standards and not just food standards. So I think excellent point, John, just excellent. We don't have a lot of time, and so I want to get your final thoughts. As I understand it, Speaker Pelosi and Secretary Mnuchin and maybe even Mitch McConnell are having a conversation about yet another program or another bill that would take a look at the economic concerns that we have as a result of COVID. And so I would like to hear from each one of you that if you could have Nancy Pelosi or Speaker or Secretary Mnuchin's ear just for a minute, and you could get one thing in that CARES 2 bill, COVID pandemic bill, what would it be? And we're going to start with you, Christopher. If you could ask them for one thing that would make a difference in the work that you do, what would you ask for?
Well, the Black Belt Community Foundation, we focus on health and education, community economic development, and in the arts. So, in looking at the food scarcity and food security issue, we have a great resource in our region with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is a farmers co-op that expands across 12, 15 states, and to be able to have policy that would allow groups in our region to help with farming, small farmers and gardening programs, so that we can focus on nutrition and health. Also, I would also say that we really need assistance in keeping our rural hospitals open.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Chris. Sister Simone, what advice would you give Speaker Pelosi right now?
Well, what I really am advocating for is an increase in the amount that each family can receive from SNAP benefits, because one of the things that's been happening is rapidly escalating costs of food during this pandemic, partially because of the dislocated supply chains we've been talking about, but also just because of need. Families are always at home, even if they are getting some help from school now, but it is more expensive for families. So that's number one. And number two is this access to healthcare. I mean, referencing what Christopher was talking about, is that we really need to ensure that our families have what they need to get healthy so that they can, in fact, thrive, even despite this pandemic, so we can get beyond it. But we're going to need this help for a while. And even once there's a vaccine, it's going to take us a while to get out of this. So let's make this long term. That's my hope.
Terrific. Great advice. What about you, Doug? What would you want?
I'd like to tell him there's not a problem with production. The American farmer is one of the most resilient ranchers there is anywhere, where they will produce and they will feed this world and they'll feed this country with some of the best food that there is. And I think there's so few of us out here now in agriculture that they would see that the capabilities of here are the food are here. Let's find ways to get it where it needs to be. Because if we don't, the price that some of these areas are receiving for the product, we're going to run out of farmers and ranchers. I mean, we see the declining amount of numbers that are in this business now and what the average age is. And without that, here in America, we will not be able to feed this country. And I think we lose my point is, I think we lose the importance on how important these young farmers and ranchers that are trying to get started in this business are to feed this country. That's the point I'd like to make to him. And then with this food, how we get it to the people. It's here. It's not like we have to go around the world to get it. And then we don't want to import all of our food because we raise the best there is in the world. And we lose sight of that. That's the point I would want to make to him. And that'd be the point I'd like to make to him.
Terrific, terrific. So, John, what would you ask for?
I think I would reiterate and just build on what's been said. First off, the SNAP program is one of the most important programs that we've all been talking about. And what I would say is, let's build on we have like a whole infrastructure. Let's build on and support the existing pipes that we have to deliver food to the American people. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. For example, we know that schools are a place where a lot of American children receive food. Rather than stand up a whole new program outside of that, let's figure out how to have the support to run through those existing channels, because that's where people know to get their food. They're accustomed to it. They trust those places, and it will create a stronger sense of connection with our government and with the people that it's trying to serve.
I mean, absolutely, all excellent suggestions, and we'll pass them on if we get a chance. I want to kind of close with the story, and it's a story about hope. It's a story when you actually think about what's going on with food insecurity. It shows that people who understand nutrition, like some of my friends here, especially Karen Ahrens, who's I think probably listening in, people who understand nutrition understand that you can't do it without education. That old day of learning how to cook next to my mother, that's probably gone. Maybe it's coming back a little bit with COVID, but my mother never met a pat of butter she didn't want or want. I mean, we always laugh. If you want to find some cream, look in a Heitkamp fridge because it's going to be in there, because that's how we learned. But it was interesting because along with the SNAP program, I want to put in a plug for SNAP education. I saw it firsthand. North Dakota Extension had been working with people who were on long-term disability. They were part of our disability community who had transitioned into independent living. They were going to be long-term recipients of this food benefit called SNAP, and they were learning to cook. And the amazing thing is, not only were they being taught what was how to cook, but they were being taught what to cook. And I met young people who were in this education program who had lost 30, 40 pounds and stopped needing insulin for their diabetes and stopped having hypertension. And so let's not forget about SNAP and SNAP education, because they go hand in hand, and the ability to understand the nutrition in our food is equally critical as access to the food. So that would be my plug. We're at the final minutes here, and I want to thank this incredible group of panelists, and I want you maybe Sister Simone and Chris, if you guys want to mention your website, because there's probably some people who have been moved by your work who would like to think about how they can connect with you. If you want to offer a plug, maybe some fundraising plugs, that'd be great. So I'll let you go first, Chris. Tell people how they can support the work you're doing.
Well, you can support the Black Belt Community Foundation by going to www.blackbeltfound.org. And I would like to mention that there's a great need in if you have a foundation or in the philanthropy world to support and assist us in the work that we're doing across our 12 to 16 counties. Thank you.
Terrific. Sister Simone?
Well, there's two places to go. One is networklobby.org, And there you'll find all of the things that we're up to. And there is our report on rural America, what we found, raising rural voices. And thanks to Senator Heitkamp, we were actually able to publish it. So it was really a great collaboration. That's raising rural voices. And the other one is go to nunsonthebus2020.org. It's our campaign we're in the midst of, nunsonthebus2020.org. And you can see there are, what we've been doing are dialogues across geographic divides, getting city folk and rural folk talking together to do that very kind of healing that we're hoping to accomplish in our nation, where we're all focused, as you were saying, Doug, on what works. Let's make this work for us together. So join us. We'd love to have you.
So I want to thank Doug so much and John so much, both in their own way, part of that critical discussion on how do we tackle hunger in America. And I know that they lead not only with some common sense and some economics, but they lead with their heart. And no one in America, in the greatest country that has ever existed in the history of the earth, should go hungry. And so let's work together to stop rural poverty, to stop rural hunger, and to stop hunger all across the board. And so thank you so much, Doug. Thank you so much, John, for the work that you do in providing support to groups as we tackle hunger in America. And again, on behalf of One Country Project, check out our work, onecountryproject.org. You'll see a lot of great research, a lot of great work that's being done, and we'll connect you with some of these programs. May God bless you and God bless our troops. And remember, November 3rd or before, if that works for you, remember to vote. Your vote counts. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.